You've been in love with him since junior year. I know because he told me on the night you introduced us." When Sloane Avery receives a text from her college best friend Eli Calloway saying he's getting married but has something to tell her first, she assumes it's a long overdue conversation about the feelings they never named. What she doesn't expect is to discover that the text wasn't sent by Eli at all. It was sent by his bride. 7 years ago, Sloane made a choice. She dressed up as generosity. She introduced Eli to the woman he's now about to marry, because she was too afraid to let herself be loved first. Now, with the wedding 3 days away and a secret that has quietly shaped 3 lives, all 3 of them are about to run out of room to keep pretending. This is a story about the things we do in the name of love, when what we really mean is fear, and what it costs to finally tell the truth before it's too late. The text came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning, wedged between a calendar reminder about a manuscript deadline and a notification that the office coffee machine was out of oat milk again. Sloane Avery was in the middle of editing a feature about open floor plan office design, a piece she found deeply uninteresting but professionally necessary, when a phone lit up on the corner of her desk with Eli Calloway's name on the screen. She didn't pick it up right away. That was the thing about Eli's name appearing on her phone after long silences. It always required a small, private moment of preparation, the way you'd brace yourself before opening a window in winter. She knew the air would hit her. She just needed a second to decide she was ready for it. She picked up the phone. She read the message. "I'm getting married, but I need to tell you something first." The ambient noise of the open-plan office keyboards, a distant phone call, someone laughing too loudly by the kitchen, continued around her as if nothing had shifted. Which was almost offensive, she thought distantly, because something had very clearly shifted. The floor had not moved, but her internal geography had rearranged itself completely in the span of 11 words. She set the phone down, picked it up again. Read it again as if the second reading might produce a different message. Maybe something cheerful and logistically simple like, "I'm getting married, save the date, here's the registry link." But no, the ellipsis was still there. The but was still there, doing all the work that word had ever been designed to do, negating what came before it, flagging that the thing coming after was the real thing. "I need to tell you something first." Sloane was 29 years old and had, in her professional life, become quite good at sitting with incomplete information. She was a senior editor at a mid-sized lifestyle magazine in Chicago, not the most glamorous version of the career she'd imagined at 22, but a real one, with a salary and health insurance and a window seat that looked out over Michigan Avenue. She edited other people's stories for a living, which meant she had trained herself to read the shape of a narrative before the whole thing was written, to understand what a piece was actually about, even when the writer didn't yet. She was good at it. She was, her colleagues said, unusually good at reading between the lines. She could not for the life of her read between these particular lines. "Because I'm getting married" was one kind of sentence. It was a happy sentence. It was the kind of sentence you sent with an exclamation point and a ring emoji to your group chat. And then there was, "But I need to tell you something first," which was a completely different kind of sentence. The kind that arrived at 11:47 on a Tuesday and made a person put down her red pen and stare at the wall for a moment. She scrolled up because she always scrolled up when she heard from Eli, some automatic need to place the present message in the context of the last one. The previous text from him was from 4 months ago, a photo of a hiking trail somewhere green and northeastern looking, captioned, "Made it to the top. You would have complained the whole way, and it would have been more fun." She had replied with a string of increasingly defensive hiking-related emoji, and he had sent back a laughing face, and that was it. 4 months of silence, and now this. She scrolled further. The messages between them were spaced this way throughout the past 7 years' long silences, then a burst of conversation, then silence again. They had slipped into this rhythm so gradually that she couldn't point to the moment it had started, couldn't identify the exact week when they had stopped being the kind of friends who called each other and started being the kind who texted occasionally and liked each other's posts. and told themselves that counted. She knew when it had started, actually. She just didn't like to look at it directly. It had started the night of the party, second semester junior year. February, in the basement apartment of their mutual friend Devon, who threw parties with the specific energy of someone convinced that excellent music would compensate for inadequate square footage. Sloane had been there first. Eli had arrived late, standing in the doorway, in a navy jacket she'd never seen before. And for approximately 4 seconds, Sloane had felt the particular unwelcome clarity of knowing, not wondering, not suspecting, but knowing exactly how she felt about him. And then Margot Chen had walked up to Devon to say hello, and Devon had introduced her to Eli. And Sloane had watched the introduction happen from across the room and thought, she's perfect for him. And then, before she could examine whether she believed that, or whether she was just looking for a reason to stand down, she had walked over and made herself part of the introduction. She had turned that potential encounter into a proper one. She had, with her own hands, built the bridge between the two of them, and then stepped off it. She had told herself for 7 years that it had been a generous thing to do. She was still not entirely sure if she believed that. She picked up her phone again and opened the text thread, read the message a third time as if it might have changed while she was remembering. It hadn't. "I'm getting married, but I need to tell you something first." She noticed, scrolling back their conversation history, that Eli had never once mentioned Margot by name in a text to her. She'd known, of course, Devon had told her when it became serious, and there'd been mutual friend updates over the years, and she had followed Margot's Instagram for approximately 6 months before quietly unfollowing it, with the careful self-awareness of someone who understood her own limits. But in 7 years of sporadic texting, Eli had not once said, "Margot thinks," or "Margot and I are going to," or "You'd like Margot, she does that thing you do where she takes notes on paper instead of her phone." He had kept those 2 parts of his life in separate rooms, and she had told herself that was just how Eli organized himself, that it didn't mean anything that she was not allowed to read into it. She was reading into it now. She was reading into everything. This was the problem with long silences. They made you store up all the interpretation you'd been deliberately not doing, and then, when something arrived, you did it all at once. Her phone lit up again. Same number. A second message sent 3 minutes after the first. "I know it's been a while. I'm sorry for that. Can we talk?" And then 30 seconds after that, "The wedding is this Saturday, Providence, Rhode Island. I know that's not a lot of notice." Sloane put her phone face down on the desk. She looked at her manuscript. She looked at the red pen in her hand. She thought about the fact that she had a noon meeting in 45 minutes and a piece due to the copy desk by 4 o'clock, and that she was, by any reasonable external measure, a functional adult with a full day ahead of her. She thought about that night in Devon's basement. She thought about the way Eli had looked at her, not at Margot, at her, right before Devon made the introduction. A look she had spent years convincing herself she'd imagined. She thought, what does he need to tell me? Her phone screen was still dark. She turned it over and called him back. It rang twice. Then someone picked up, and the voice on the other end was not Eli's. It was a woman's voice, clear and unhurried, with a slight accent she couldn't immediately place. "Sloane," the voice said, not as a question, not as a greeting that needed to establish who it was talking to, just her name. Said the way you say the name of someone you've been expecting. Sloane's hand tightened on the phone. "I'm sorry," she said, because she was very good at filling silence when she needed to. "I think I might have called the wrong... I was trying to reach Eli Calloway." "You did," the voice said. "This is his phone. I'm Margot. I've been looking forward to talking to you." There was a pause, and in that pause, Sloane became aware of several things simultaneously. The coffee machine gurgling in the background of her office, the way her heart had developed an irregular rhythm sometime in the last 40 seconds, and the particular quality of Margot's voice, warm, yes, but also carrying beneath it the specific weight of someone who had prepared for this conversation, had perhaps rehearsed it, and was not going to be thrown off by anything Sloane said. "Margot," Sloane said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was a professional skill she was grateful for. "Congratulations. I saw the message. I got Eli's message about the wedding." "Yes," Margot said. "His message. I wanted to call it that too, for a bit. But I think we're past the point where the framing helps anyone." A brief pause. "I'd really love it if you could come to Providence. This week, if possible, before Saturday. I know it's sudden." "Margot," Sloane said carefully, "is Eli there?" "He's at the venue right now," Margot said, "walking through the setup with the coordinator. He doesn't know I called you back." Another pause, briefer. "He thinks I'm getting my nails done." Sloane looked at the manuscript on her desk, the red pen, the 11:57 timestamp on her computer screen. She looked at the message on her phone, still open in the background. "I'm getting married, but I need to tell you something first." "What is it?" Sloane said not a question exactly, more a thought spoken aloud. "That he needs to tell me." Margot's voice when she answered was very quiet and very kind, and carried the specific weight of someone laying down something heavy they had been carrying for a very long time. "That's the thing," she said. "I think it's better if you're here when he does. And Sloane, I think you need to come. I think we all do, actually." The line was quiet for a moment. Somewhere on the Michigan Avenue side of the building, a city bus went past its engine, a low rumble that Sloane felt more than heard. "I'll be there Thursday," she said. She didn't know why she said it, or rather she knew exactly why, and that was the problem. She hung up. She turned her phone over once, twice, 3 times on the desk. She picked up her red pen and looked at the manuscript, and then she put the pen down, because she was not in any meaningful sense going to be editing this afternoon. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small, battered composition notebook, the kind she'd carried since college, the kind Eli used to tease her about, because he said only people in black and white European films carried composition notebooks unironically. In it, she kept lists, things to do, things to read, things to think about later. She turned to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, "What does he need to tell me?" And then below it, she wrote, "What do I need to say back?" She looked at both lines for a long time. Then she closed the notebook, put it back in the drawer, and pulled up the Amtrak website. Providence, Thursday, 51-hour advance booking window. She could make it work. Her noon meeting was in 37 minutes. She should eat something. She should also probably examine the fact that she was rearranging her entire week around a text message she wasn't even sure had been sent by the person whose name was on it. A thought that had arrived quietly at the edge of her mind, somewhere around, "This is his phone," and had not left since. "He doesn't know I called you back." She looked at the Amtrak booking page. She entered her details. She confirmed the reservation. She picked up her red pen and turned back to the manuscript about open floor plan offices, and she made herself read the first sentence 4 times before it meant anything. And then she kept going. She was good at keeping going. She had been good at it for 7 years. The train to Providence left Chicago at 8:15 Thursday morning, and Sloane was on it with a carry-on bag, her laptop, the composition notebook, and a large coffee she'd bought in the station, and was already regretting because it tasted like it had been brewed sometime in the previous administration. She had a window seat, which was something, and the lake was visible for the first 40 minutes out of the city, gray-green and vast. The kind of view that made her feel temporarily small in a way she found useful rather than distressing. She had told her editor Priya that she had a family situation. Not a lie, exactly. She had simply declined to specify whose family. Priya had given her a look over the rim of her reading glasses that communicated with great efficiency that Priya did not entirely believe her, but was choosing not to press, and that the copy desk deadline had been pushed to Monday in acknowledgement of whatever was actually happening. This was one of the things Sloane genuinely valued about Priya. The woman had an almost supernatural ability to offer exactly the right amount of grace without requiring an explanation she wasn't going to get anyway. On the train, Sloane opened her laptop with the intention of working. She read the same paragraph of the open floor plan piece 3 times. She closed the laptop. She opened the composition notebook. She had, over the past 2 days, filled 7 pages with handwriting. Not journaling exactly. She didn't journal, found it too self-conscious, too aware of the hypothetical future reader. This was more like argument, point-counterpoint, evidence-counter-evidence. The kind of writing she did when she was trying to think something through that she couldn't think through by just sitting with it. The central question had not changed. What does he need to tell you? The answers she'd generated ranged from the plausible, he wanted to tell her about the wedding in person before the invitation was sent. The text had been impulsive. He felt guilty about how much distance had grown between them. To the one she kept circling back to at 2 in the morning, he had always known how she felt. He had wanted to talk about it before he made this permanent. The something was the same thing she would have said if she'd ever been brave enough to say it. She had written in the margin of page 4, in much smaller handwriting than everything else, "You are not going to Providence because you think he's going to call off the wedding. You are going because you need to close something that has been open for 7 years, and you owe yourself that much." She had underlined it. She had then almost torn the page out. She had not. She had also spent a significant portion of Wednesday night going through her text history with Eli, with a focus and attention she usually reserved for final manuscript reviews, looking for the thing she knew she'd been not looking at for years. And she'd found it not in any single message, but in the pattern of them, the texture, the way he always responded within 20 minutes, regardless of when she texted, even at midnight, even during what she knew from Devon were difficult work stretches. The way certain messages had the specific rhythm of someone who had written and deleted several drafts before arriving at the version he sent. The hiking photo 4 months ago, you would have complained the whole way, and it would have been more fun. The particular quality of missing someone built into a sentence structured as a joke, and the fact that he had never, in 7 years of texts, mentioned Margot. Not once. Sloane had gone through every conversation thread, and the woman who was about to become his wife was completely absent, as if he'd built a room for Sloane in his life and kept it entirely separate from everything else. She didn't know what to do with that, so she'd written it down and kept moving. The Connecticut shoreline was appearing outside the window now. Small towns, white steepled churches, the Atlantic and glimpses between buildings. She thought about calling Devon, who had been her closest local contact on all things Eli and Margot over the years, and who she'd specifically not called because Devon would ask exactly the question she didn't want to answer, which was, "Why are you actually going?" She knew why she was going. She was going because Margot had called her back on Eli's phone and said, "I think you need to come," with the specific confidence of someone who knew something Sloane didn't. She was going because the message had said, "I need to tell you something first." And the first had been sitting in her chest like a splinter since Tuesday. She was going because it had been 7 years, and she was 29, and she was tired in the deep way that had nothing to do with sleep, of being careful. The train pulled into Providence at 4:40 in the afternoon, 7 minutes late. Sloane wheeled her carry-on through the station and stood on the sidewalk outside while she called the lift and felt the particular quality of Rhode Island's spring air, cool, salt-edged, smelling like the ocean, was very nearby and making no secret of it. She had never been to Providence before. She had pictured it as either very small or very quaint, and it turned out to be neither. It was a real city, compact and slightly hilly, with brick buildings and church spires, and the sense of a place that had been here long enough to stop apologizing for its own architecture. The lift took her to a small hotel 2 blocks from the water Eli had texted her the name the night before. Just the name and address, no additional context. She checked in, changed out of her travel clothes, stood at the window of her room for a while, watching a tugboat make its unhurried way across the Providence River. Her phone buzzed. "Eli, you here?" "Just checked in," she typed back. "Give me 20 minutes. His reply, "The restaurant's 3 blocks from your hotel. I'll send the pin." And then, After a pause of about 45 seconds, a second message. "I'm really glad you came, Sloane." She looked at that sentence for a long time. Then she put her phone in her pocket, found her jacket, and went downstairs. The restaurant was Italian small, the kind of place that had been there long enough to earn its own gravity. Eli was already at the table when she arrived, standing up when he saw her. Something he had always done, that she had always tried not to find endearing and had never quite managed. 7 years. He looked like himself, and also like a version of himself that had been through some weather. Same dark eyes, same way of holding himself, the particular quality of quiet attention that had always made her feel in his company like whatever she was saying was genuinely worth hearing. But there were lines around his eyes she didn't remember, and he looked at her with something she couldn't immediately name. Not quite relief, not quite apprehension. Something in the middle that suggested he had been carrying a question for a very long time and hadn't yet decided whether he was allowed to ask it. "Hey," she said, because sometimes you had to start with the small word and build from there. "Hey," he said. His smile was careful and real and careful. They sat down, and then Margot walked through the door. She was tall, taller than Sloane had expected from photos, which she was slightly embarrassed to admit she'd looked at with the kind of self-possessed stillness that read as either great confidence or great self-control, and you didn't know which until you got closer. She came to the table and kissed Eli's cheek, and then turned to Sloane with an expression Sloane couldn't classify. Warm, yes, but also precise, as if she was confirming something she had suspected but needed to verify in person. "Sloane," she said, "I'm so glad you're here." And she said it the same way she'd said Sloane's name on the phone, like she already knew her, had already thought about her, had already worked out most of what there was to work out. "Congratulations," Sloane said, and she meant it. And also she did not entirely mean it. And she was a professional editor, and she was very aware of the double valence of everything she was saying. They ordered wine. They ordered food. The conversation moved through the expected channels. Sloane's work, the city, how the drive from Eli's apartment had been, the logistics of wedding planning. A story about a florist who had wildly misunderstood the concept of minimalist white. Eli was funny about it. Margot was dryly funny about it. And Sloane laughed genuinely at the florist's story, and felt for a few minutes the comfortable ease of people who actually liked each other's company. But Margot kept doing the thing, kept asking questions that arrived at their target too efficiently, asked Sloane about her job in a way that landed precisely on the specific thing Sloane found most interesting about it, as if she'd done some reading first. Asked about Chicago in a way that indicated she already knew Sloane had almost moved to New York 3 years ago and had chosen not to. At one point, mid-conversation about something else entirely, Margot turned to her and said very casually, "Eli told me you have a thing about February, that it's your least favorite month." I always thought I was the only person who had a least favorite month. Sloane looked at her. Then she looked at Eli, who was looking at the wine list with the focused attention of someone not looking at the wine list. "Yeah," she said. "February. Specifically the middle of it." Margot nodded as if this confirmed something. "I can see why," she said, and moved on to something else. And Sloane spent the rest of the dinner with that sentence sitting at the back of her head, like an open bracket, waiting to be closed. After dinner, Margot excused herself to take a call from her mother. Wedding logistics. She said something about table placements that apparently required her physical presence somewhere else in the restaurant, which left Sloane and Eli on the sidewalk, outside in the cool, salt-edged Providence air, while a couple walked by with a dog. And somewhere nearby, someone was playing live music at a volume that was pleasant rather than intrusive. "It's good to see you," Eli said. He meant it. She could always tell when he meant things. "You too," she said, and she meant it the way you mean something you've been trying not to mean for a very long time. He looked at her for a moment, that look again, the one she'd named as something in the middle and still couldn't get more precise than that. And then he said, "I owe you something I should have said a long time ago." The city moved around them, The music continued. A cab went past. Sloane opened her mouth to say something. She wasn't sure what. Maybe, "What do you mean?" Or maybe the thing she'd had stored in her chest since Devon's party in February, 7 years ago. And then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Something shifted in his face, just slightly, just for a second. The way a mask adjusts when the person behind it decides to hold position. "It's Margot," he said. "I should go," she said. "It's fine. We can talk tomorrow." He answered the phone. He mouthed sorry at her. She waved it off, because she was very good at waving things off. She stood on the sidewalk after he went back inside and looked at the water at the end of the block, the harbor lights coming on in the early dark, and she thought about what he'd said. "I owe you something." And she thought about the way Margot had said, "I can see why," about February. And she thought about the look on Eli's face when he'd seen her in the restaurant and stood up. She pulled out her composition notebook and wrote on a fresh page, "He started to say something." And below it, because she was honest with herself in the composition notebook when she couldn't be anywhere else, "What happens if he finishes the sentence?" She closed the notebook and walked back to the hotel, and the music followed her for a block and a half before it faded, and the city was very quiet in its wake. She woke up on Friday morning with the specific alertness of someone whose body had slept, but whose mind had not. And she lay in the hotel room for a moment, listening to Providence seagulls, a distant foghorn, the rhythmic rumble of a delivery truck somewhere below the window. The light coming through the curtains was the pale, watery gray of early New England morning, the kind of light that didn't commit to anything. She checked her phone. A text from Devon, who had apparently figured out she was in Providence through some combination of Instagram location tags and the ambient telepathy Devon had always possessed. "Are you actually there right now? Sloane." Sloane. She put the phone face down and got dressed. Eli had texted at 7:15. "Coffee. I know a place. I can come by the hotel." She'd replied, "Give me 30 minutes." He was outside when she came down, leaning against the railing at the edge of the small patio in front of the hotel, looking at something on his phone. And she had the specific experience she always had with Eli when she saw him unexpectedly, a half-second of her nervous system adjusting, as if the ambient temperature of the world had changed slightly. He looked up when she came out. "Morning," he said. "Morning." They walked 2 blocks to a coffee place that was the size of a large closet and smelled extraordinarily good, freshly roasted with the dark sweetness of high-end equipment and someone who actually knew what they were doing. They ordered and took their cups to a bench outside because the interior had 4 stools and both of them were already occupied. It was a good morning to be outside. Not warm, but genuinely spring. The kind of air that carried in it the specific promise that whatever had been cold and close was loosening, was about to release. "So," Sloane said, because she had never been good at waiting when something needed to be said. "So?" Eli agreed. He held his coffee with both hands, which was something she remembered about him. He always held a cup with both hands, regardless of the temperature. "Last night," she said, "you started to say something." He looked at the street. A woman walked by with a stroller. 2 pigeons debated loudly over something near the curb. "Yeah," he said. "Was it the thing in the message?" she said. "The something you needed to tell me?" He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive quiet, thinking quiet. She knew the difference. "Part of it," he said finally. "And the other part." He turned and looked at her, and that look was back. The one that was not quite relief and not quite apprehension, and lived somewhere in the middle. The look of someone standing at a doorway, deciding whether to step through. "I want to tell you everything," he said. "I should have told you. I've wanted to tell you something for a long time, but I need to do it right, not on a bench. Can we?" He paused. "Can we go back to the house I've been staying at a rental with Margot's family this week? She's at some pre-wedding brunch thing until noon. I'd feel better talking there." She nodded. They flagged a lift. The rental house was in a quiet neighborhood 6 blocks from the water, a renovated colonial with white clapboard siding and a deep porch, and the specific, well-maintained beauty of a house that had been lived in long enough to know what it was. The interior was the organized, impersonal comfort of a vacation rental. Good furniture, framed local artwork, a kitchen with a blue tile backsplash, and a long wooden table that someone's whole family could sit around. Eli unlocked the door and they went in, and Sloane stopped. On the living room coffee table, visible from the entryway, was a framed photograph. Not a large one, 5 by 7, in a simple silver frame, but it stopped her because she knew it. She knew it with the specific, startled recognition of someone seeing their own face in an unexpected reflection. It was the photograph from the party. Devon's basement, February junior year. Taken from across the room before the introductions, before Margot had walked through the door. Just Sloane and Eli, mid-conversation, his head angled toward her laughing at something. She didn't know who had taken it. Devon, probably, or one of Devon's roommates with a chronic need to document. She had been tagged in it once years ago and had quietly untagged herself, which was as close as she'd been able to get to removing it from existence. She hadn't known anyone still had a print. She crossed to the coffee table, picked up the frame, looked at it. "Eli," she said, and her voice came out careful and flat, in the way it got when she was being very deliberate about keeping it from doing something else. He came and stood beside her, looked at the photo. "I know. Why is this here?" "Because I put it there," he said. "About 3 years ago. I take it wherever I go for more than a few nights. I don't always put it out, but—" He stopped, started again. "I put it out this week because I kept looking at it, and I figured I might as well not pretend I wasn't." She set the frame down very carefully back on the coffee table. She looked at him. "Eli, I know," he said again, and this time it had a different quality. Not agreement, not apology. Something that sounded like, "I know you need me to say this plainly, and I'm getting there." She sat down on the couch across from the coffee table and looked at the photograph. Because looking at the photograph was easier than looking at him while he figured out how to say whatever he was going to say. The photograph was from a night she had run an entire internal story about, had told herself for 7 years, "You did the right thing." You could see they'd be good together. You stepped back because you cared about him. The photograph was evidence that there had been a before, a moment before the story she'd told herself had started. And she hadn't expected to see it sitting on someone's coffee table in Providence, Rhode Island, in a silver frame. "Tell me," she said. She was very calm. She had been trained by years of professional practice to be very calm when she was the least calm she had ever been. Eli sat down in the chair across from her. He held his coffee cup in both hands, and he looked at her and he said, "That night, Devon's party, I was going to tell you something. I'd actually planned it, which is embarrassing in retrospect. I had this whole idea about how I was going to say it. And then you walked over to where I was talking to Devon and Margot, and you were so—" He paused. "You were so warm. The way you introduced yourself, the way you pulled her into the conversation, the way you made it this whole easy thing. And I watched you do it, and I thought you were telling me something. I thought the warmth was the message." Sloane said nothing. "I thought," he said carefully, "that you were showing me that this was what you wanted, that you wanted me to be with her, that you were stepping back, on purpose." The kitchen refrigerator hummed. A car went by outside. The photograph sat on the coffee table between them, perfectly still and perfectly clear. "Eli," she said, "why would I have wanted that?" He met her eyes. "That's what I could never figure out," he said. "That's what I've been trying to figure out for 7 years." They stayed in that particular moment for a long time, the two of them on either side of the coffee table, the photograph between them. All of it balanced on the edge of something that had been 7 years in the making and was now within about 1 sentence of tipping over into the open. And then Sloane's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Devon. She silenced it. And then Eli's phone on the kitchen counter where he'd left it rang. He glanced at it. Then something crossed his face. Surprise, then something more complicated. and he stood up and crossed to the counter and looked at the screen without touching it. His body went very still. Not tense exactly, more the specific stillness of someone working through an equation in their head very quickly. "It's Margot," he said. She said she was at brunch until noon." "It's 11:20, Sloane said. He picked up the phone. "Margot, hey, I thought you were—" He listened. His face was unreadable for a moment. Then he said, "Okay. Yeah, we'll be right there." He hung up, looked at Sloane. "She wants to come back here. She says she needs to talk to both of us." A pause. "Together." Sloane looked at the photograph on the coffee table. She thought about the phone call from Tuesday. "I think it's better if you're here when he does." And she thought about the way Margot had said, "I can see why," about February, and the text message at 11:47 on Tuesday that said, "I'm getting married, but I need to tell you something first." "Eli," she said slowly, "did you send me that text on Tuesday? The one about the wedding?" He looked at her. His expression for the first time since she'd arrived in Providence was completely unguarded. "What?" "The first text, Tuesday morning. Did you send it?" The refrigerator hummed. The silence between them took on a particular texture, the texture of something just understood, something that had been lying in plain sight and had just been turned to face the light. "Sloane," he said, and his voice was quiet and strange. "I don't own a blue coffee mug. My mugs are all white." That's something Margot would know because she's the one who— He stopped himself, picked up his phone, opened the message thread. He was very quiet for a long moment. "I sent you a text at 8 this morning," he said, "about coffee. That's the last one from me." They looked at each other across the kitchen. "She was at home," he said slowly. "Tuesday morning. I was at the venue doing a walkthrough. She was home." Sloane heard the front door open. She heard footsteps on the hardwood, the specific cadence of someone who knew exactly where she was going and had already decided what she was going to say when she got there. Margot came into the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee from the same cafe they'd been to this morning. She set them on the counter. She looked at Eli, then at Sloane, then at Eli again, and the look on her face was the clearest Sloane had seen it. Not warm and precise, not careful, just very direct and very tired. The look of someone who had arrived at the end of carrying something alone for a very long time. "I figured it was better to come back," she said, "before you both got too far into the wrong conversation." She looked at Sloane specifically. "I have some things I need to say to you. Without Eli. Is that okay?" Sloane looked at Eli. Eli looked like he was working through a series of emotions in quick succession and hadn't yet landed on one. Then he nodded, not to Margot, to Sloane, as if he was the one giving permission, which told her something important about how he saw whatever was happening here. "Tomorrow," Margot said. "Just you and me. Coffee or wherever you want to meet. I'll explain everything." "You could explain now," Sloane said. "I could," Margot agreed. "But Eli has a tuxedo fitting in 45 minutes, and it would be cruel to make him late in the state he's currently in." She said it without humor, exactly, but also without cruelty, the way you say a difficult thing when you have decided to stop softening it. She looked at her fiancé. "Go," she said gently. "I promise this isn't what you think it is." He went, not without one more look at Sloane. Long, the kind that tried to say several things at once and succeeded at none of them, but tried. She watched him leave, and then it was just her and Margot in the kitchen with its blue tile backsplash, the photograph still visible through the doorway on the coffee table. "That picture," Sloane said. "How long has he had it?" Margot poured herself a glass of water. She leaned against the counter with the ease of someone comfortable in her own territory. "He brought it to our first apartment," she said. "I asked him about it. He told me it was from your junior year. He said you were the person who taught him how to actually listen to other people, that he looked at it sometimes to remember what that felt like, to have someone who really listened." She paused. "He believed that's all it was, I think he'd been telling himself that for so long he'd mostly convinced himself. Mostly, Sloane said. Mostly, Margot agreed. She looked at Sloane calmly. I'll see you tomorrow morning. There's a cafe on Benefit Street. It's called the Blue State, 9 o'clock. Sloane looked at the photograph through the doorway. She looked at Margot. She thought about the 7 pages in her composition notebook, about the train from Chicago, about February, and the photograph, and Eli's voice saying, I owe you something I should have said a long time ago. 9 o'clock, she said. She walked back to the hotel. She did not open her composition notebook. She sat on the bed and looked at the ceiling and felt the specific texture of a story she'd been telling herself beginning to come apart at the seams, and she did not yet know what the real one looked like. Outside, Providence continued to be a city unhurried and certain, and the harbor lights came on one by one as the afternoon went dark. The Blue State on Benefit Street had the specific quality of a Providence institution not famous, not trying to be just good in the way a place gets good when it's been doing one thing for long enough to stop thinking about it. High ceilings, mismatched chairs, the kind of ambient murmur that made private conversation possible without requiring whispers. Sloane arrived at 8:55 and found a corner table and sat with her back to the wall, which was something she'd started doing after a particularly claustrophobic period in her mid-20s and had never stopped. Margot arrived at 9 exactly, not 1 minute before or after, and Sloane thought, she is the kind of person who arrives at exactly the time she says she will. It told you something. She ordered a black coffee and sat down across from Sloane with the deliberate ease of someone who had decided quite firmly how this morning was going to go. Thank you for coming, Margot said. You knew I would, Sloane said, a very faint smile. Yes. Sloane had a cappuccino she hadn't touched yet. She looked at it. She looked at Margot. She was 32 in the morning light, or thereabouts older than Sloane had pictured from photos, or maybe just more present than photos allowed for. She had the specific quality of a person who had arrived at herself through some difficulty and was not apologizing for any of it. Tell me about the text, Sloane said, because that was the thread that pulled everything else, and she'd decided on the walk over that she was going to pull it first before anything else. Margot wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Not the way Eli did it. Eli held a cup like a habit, automatic warming. Margot held it the way you hold something when you're about to say the thing you came here to say, and you want something solid in your hands while you do. Tuesday morning, she said. Eli went to the venue at 8 o'clock for a walkthrough. He left his phone on the nightstand. I went through his contacts. She said it plainly, without apology. I found your name. I wrote the message. I sent it from his phone, and then I put it back on the nightstand. And when he came home, I didn't tell him. The cafe continued around them. Someone ordered at the counter. Outside, a bicycle went past on Benefit Street. Why? Sloane said. Margot was quiet for a moment. Not a hesitating quiet, a gathering quiet. Because we had a rehearsal dinner planned for Friday night. Because the wedding was Saturday. Because I had been standing at the edge of something for 3 years, and I had run out of time to decide whether to step back. She looked at Sloane. And because I knew that if I was going to have the wedding, I needed you not to be the question in the room. And if I wasn't going to have the wedding, she stopped, started again. I needed someone else to open the door because I couldn't make myself do it. Sloane looked at her. You're not going to have the wedding. It wasn't a question. She knew it wasn't a question as soon as she said it. She'd known it somewhere beneath the surface since Margot had walked into the kitchen the day before with that direct, exhausted look. Since the moment on the phone Tuesday when Margot had said, I think we're past the point where the framing helps anyone. Margot let out a breath. No, she said. I'm not. The word landed in the space between them and sat there, quiet and very large. I need you to understand something, Margot said. Eli is a good person. He's one of the best people I've met. He has never been anything other than kind to me. He's never made me feel second best. He's never... She paused. He doesn't know he makes me feel second best. That's almost the harder part. He doesn't do it on purpose. It's not something he says or does. It's something underneath everything, something structural. And I understood it going in, and I thought... She stopped herself. I thought the structural thing would change. That's not Eli's failure. That's mine. What's the structural thing? Sloane asked, though she thought she knew. Margot looked at her steadily. You, she said. Not accusatory, factual. Not you specifically as a person, as a threat, but the shape of you. The shape of what he wanted before he talked himself out of wanting it. I knew about it from the beginning. He told me about you on our second date, which I think he thought was appropriate context setting, and which I now understand was something he needed to tell someone out loud, because he'd been carrying it alone for too long. She paused. He told me you introduced us, at a party junior year. He said, and this is the part he didn't fully understand he was telling me, he said he watched you do it and couldn't figure out why, but that he'd learned eventually that some people showed you what they wanted by what they gave away. Sloane went very still. The cappuccino in front of her had developed a skin completely untouched. He thought, Margot said carefully, that you were giving him away. That night at the party, he thought it was a deliberate message that you were showing him you didn't want him, and that making the introduction was your way of saying so without having to say it. That's not, Sloane started. I know, Margot said. I know it's not what you were doing. I figured that out by about the third month of dating him, but I also figured out that it didn't matter, because he'd built his whole understanding of that night around that interpretation, and he'd been living inside it for so long that he'd made it true for himself. He'd decided you didn't want him. And so, he decided to want someone else. And he was very sincere about it, and I was very grateful for it. And it worked. Until it didn't, Sloane said. Until it didn't, Margot agreed. She looked at her hands. He loves me. I want to be very clear about that. I am not a consolation prize in his life. I am not someone he settled for. He loves me genuinely. But there's a version of love that's a decision you make to move forward, and a version that's a thing that's already there before you've decided anything. And we've both known for a while that ours was the first kind. She looked up. The first kind is real. The first kind can build something, but it asks a lot of both people. And I'm tired. Sloane thought about Devon's basement in February, the navy jacket, the 4-second clarity, the introduction she'd made with her own hands, telling herself the whole time that she was doing it because she was a good friend, a generous person, someone who put others first. She thought about the composition notebook and the 7 pages she'd filled on the train, and the line she'd underlined, "You are not going to Providence because you think he's going to call off the wedding." She had been so sure of that, and she had been right, and she had also been so deeply wrong about the shape of what was actually happening. You could have just broken it off yourself, Sloane said. You didn't need to send that text. You didn't need me to be here. No, Margot said. I didn't need you to be here for me. She looked at Sloane with the specific directness of someone who has been honest all morning and has no intention of stopping now. I needed you to be here for him. When it happens, because I know him, and I know that when this falls apart, the first thing he's going to do is put the wall back up and disappear into work and tell himself it's fine. And someone needs to be there when he does that. Someone who has a reason to not let him. She paused. And there are also things he needs to say to you. Things he's been not saying for 7 years. I couldn't leave him alone with those on the other side of this I couldn't just leave him with them. Sloane looked at the table. The cappuccino with its untouched surface, the small vase of flowers in the center of the table, white some flower she didn't know the name of, the grain of the wood under her hands. What is it? She said very quietly. That you actually wanted to say to me. Not about Eli. To me. Margot was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You've been in love with him since junior year. I know because he told me on the night you introduced us. She said it gently, the same way she'd said everything this morning. Not to wound, not to confront, just to name the thing that had been in the room unnamed for this entire conversation. He told me that night, our second date, that there was someone he'd been in love with in college who he'd never told, and that she had shown him, without knowing it, that she didn't feel the same way, and that he was trying to be the kind of person who moved forward. And I thought, she paused, I thought I could be the person he moved forward with. And I was. I am. But I am not the person he would have chosen if he'd known the choice was still available to him. The words went into Sloane slowly, the way cold water goes in, not all at once, but layer by layer, each sentence adjusting the temperature of the one before it. He told you that, she said. That night. That night, Margot said. Second date. We were at a bar, and he'd had 2 drinks, and there was a song playing he said reminded him of someone, and I asked who, and he told me. She almost smiled. I should have run. Anyone sensible would have. But I liked him very much, and I thought I understood the kind of love that's a decision, and I thought it would be enough. Sloane sat with that for a moment. She thought about the text at 11:47 on Tuesday. The voice on the phone. I've been looking forward to talking to you. All of it. The dinner, the careful questions, the blue coffee mug remark. The way Margot had said, I can see why, about February. It had all been a woman who knew the whole story, had known it from the beginning, and had arranged this week with a surgeon's precision. Not out of cruelty, not out of revenge, but out of something that looked, the more Sloane turned it over, very much like an act of profound, exhausted generosity. You're giving him back? Sloane said. Margot's expression did something complicated and then settled. I'm giving myself back, she said. He just happens to be in the vicinity. She picked up her coffee. There's something you should know. He doesn't know the text was from me. I told him this morning before the fitting that we needed to talk. He knows something is. He knows the shape of what's coming. But he doesn't know the whole thing yet. When are you going to tell him? This afternoon, Margot said. At the venue, 4 o'clock. We were supposed to do a final walkthrough. She looked at Sloane. I'd like you to come. Not to be there for the walkthrough, to be there after. Margot, I know how it looks, Margot said. I know it looks like I'm managing something, like I'm running a production. But I've thought about this for a long time, and I think there are things that need to happen in the same space, and I think you being there when it's done is one of them. Not because I want you to see it, because he's going to need someone, and I'm going to be in the middle of my own version of this, and it should be you. Sloane looked at her across the table. She thought about the photograph on the coffee table, silver frame, 5x7 Devon's basement, and about Eli saying, I take it wherever I go, for more than a few nights. She thought about 7 years of sporadic texts and careful distance, and a man who had apparently been carrying a printed photograph of a night she'd spent 7 years misremembering. What's the ruse you're running on yourself? She said suddenly, because it had arrived fully formed, and she trusted those. You said you're tired. You said you knew the shape of this going in. What is it you're running from that made you choose a relationship you knew wasn't the first choice? Margot looked at her for a long moment. It was the first time all morning she'd looked anything other than completely composed, and what showed in the gap was not fragility exactly, but something more like age. The look of someone who had been thinking about a thing for a very long time and had not yet decided how much of it to say. My family, she said finally, is very good at loving people and very bad at letting them be. My mother has been managing my life with enormous warmth and zero consultation since I was about 11, and I spent a long time looking for the kind of man who would be safe from her. She paused. Eli is very gentle about other people's autonomy. He never tells you what to do. He just makes space and lets you fill it. That was what I needed. Not him specifically, but what he gave me. She looked at her coffee. I know that's not a great thing to hear. It's honest, Sloane said. I've been doing a lot of that lately, Margot said, with something that was almost dry amusement. It turns out you can only run on the managed version for so long before the seams show." They sat together for a little while longer. Not talking much, there wasn't much more to say. Not yet. Not here. Outside, Benefit Street continued to exist. Pedestrians and bicycles, and a couple of students from the university walking by with backpacks. And the city had the specific quality of a Friday morning before a weekend, loose and unhurried, and full of things not yet decided. When Sloane walked back to the hotel, she passed a flower stand on the corner and bought nothing. But she stopped and looked at the white flowers for a long time, the same kind that had been on the cafe table, small and without the flashy drama of a rose, just present and clean. She went upstairs. She opened her composition notebook to the page she'd written on the train. "What does he need to tell you? What do you need to say back?" She looked at both lines. Then she turned to a fresh page and wrote, "He didn't know she sent it. She did it for him, and also for herself, and also in the strange, specific way of people who are done pretending for you." She underlined the last two words. Then she wrote, 4 o'clock, the venue. Be there. She closed the notebook and lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about Eli's voice in the kitchen yesterday. "I owe you something I should have said a long time ago." And thought about what it would feel like to finally let someone finish a sentence she'd been interrupting, one way or another, for 7 years. The seagulls were back outside. Providence was doing what it always did, indifferent and beautiful, and the afternoon was still hours away, and she had time. For the first time since Tuesday morning, she thought maybe she'd actually come here with enough courage to use it. The venue was a converted mill building 5 blocks from the harbor, the kind of place that had been a textile factory in 1890, and had spent the intervening century becoming increasingly beautiful without trying to, the way old structures sometimes do when they're left mostly alone. High, exposed beams, tall windows, brick walls the color of dried clay, and late afternoon light coming through the south-facing glass in wide, warm columns that landed on the polished concrete floor like something someone had arranged on purpose. Sloane arrived at 3:50. She was not sure why she'd come early, except that she could not make herself stay in the hotel room. She had eaten lunch she couldn't remember, and spent 2 hours walking the city along the Riverwalk, past the bronze bugs embedded in the pavement on Benefit Street, around College Hill and back down, and arrived at the mill building with her coat buttoned and her composition notebook in her bag, and the very specific feeling of someone who has decided to do a thing and is now waiting for the thing to begin. A young coordinator named Sophie met her at the door. Dark ponytail, clipboard, the high wire energy of someone responsible for a wedding that may or may not still be happening. Sophie gave her a look that suggested she was expecting Sloane's arrival, but perhaps not at 3:50, and showed her to a long wooden bench along the south wall, and said that Eli and Margot would be there shortly. Sloane sat. She looked at the space. It was beautiful, she thought. Genuinely beautiful. The kind of space where you could imagine something important happening. There were white flower arrangements on the empty tables, the same small white flowers from the cafe this morning, and she thought about the strange, circling repetition of that. The flowers in the cafe, the flowers here. As if the day had a visual motif it was insisting on. Eli arrived first. He came through the main door at 3:58, and he saw her on the bench, and his pace changed. Not stopped, not faltered, but changed the way someone's stride changes when they see what they were expecting and find it also surprising. He came and sat beside her on the bench. Not across, beside. Close enough that she could have reached over and touched his arm if she had wanted to, which she noticed herself noticing. "She told you to come," he said. "Yes." "She told me the same." He looked at the flower arrangements. "She also told me this morning that we needed to talk, before the walkthrough." A pause. "I've known for about 3 weeks that something was shifting. I've been pretending I didn't because I didn't." He stopped. "I didn't want to be the reason she did something she'd regret." "Eli," she said. "I know," he said. "I think I've known for longer than 3 weeks. I think I've been performing certainty for a while because I didn't have a better option to move toward. And that's not fair to her. That's not what she deserves. Sloane looked at the light coming through the south windows, columns of warm, gold-edged light falling across the polished floor, entirely unhurried. She sent me the text, she said. Not you. She used your phone Tuesday morning. She arranged all of this. He was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. She told me today, when she told me a lot of things today. He looked at his hands. I don't know how to feel about the text yet, about the fact that she made this happen on purpose. He paused. Part of me is angry. Part of me is, I don't know. Relieved is the wrong word, but there's something in me that's been waiting for someone to just move things because I wasn't going to. I wasn't going to do it. Why not? He turned and looked at her, and the light from the south windows was behind him, and his face was in the amber edge of it, and he said, Because the last time I watched you choose what you wanted and walked away with the answer, it took me 7 years to stop trying to figure out what the answer meant. The space between them was very quiet. Sophie was somewhere at the far end of the room, moving things, not looking at them with the professional tact of someone who has been at many emotionally complicated venue walkthroughs. The party, Sloane said. The party, he said. I didn't choose, she said. I panicked. There's a difference. I know that now, he said. He said it without accusation, without self-pity, just the flat, clear note of something understood too late. I didn't know it then. I was 22, and I read the situation exactly wrong. And I built 7 years on top of a wrong reading. He was quiet for a moment. Why did you? If it was panic, why did you go over there? Why did you introduce them? She looked at the white flowers on the nearest table. She had spent 7 years with a story about this. A story with the clean shape of selflessness. I could see they'd be good together. I wanted to give him something good. And she looked at the flowers and thought about Margot in the cafe this morning, saying, some people show you what they want by what they give away. And she thought, you could tell the clean story again. You could. She was good at the clean story. She'd had a lot of practice. I was scared, she said instead. I saw you in the doorway and I had about 4 seconds of being completely sure of something, and then I talked myself out of it so fast I needed a place to put the energy. And the place I put it was in going over there and being warm and generous and useful. And I told myself I was doing something good, and I think by the end of the night I'd mostly convinced myself. He was very still beside her. I'm sorry, she said. I had 4 seconds of knowing exactly what I wanted, and I didn't trust it, and that's... She stopped. That's on me, not on you. You read the situation wrong, and I gave you every reason to. The main door of the venue opened. Margot came in still in her coat, and she walked toward them with the steady, unhurried pace of someone who has been preparing for a conversation her entire morning and has nothing left to brace for. She stopped when she reached them. She looked at both of them on the bench together, and something in her face went through a small, private reckoning and came out the other side. She sat down on the chair across from the bench, facing them both. She opened her handbag. She took out Eli's phone, the one from Tuesday, and she set it on the empty chair beside her. The screen was dark. I owe you both an explanation, she said, and I owe you an apology. Not for what I did, I don't think I'm sorry for that, actually, but for not being honest sooner. About what I knew and when I knew it, and what I was running from when I decided it was enough to be with someone who loved me the first choice way, even when the math was more complicated than that. She looked at Eli first. I'm not doing this because I think you're unhappy. I know you're not unhappy. I know you love me, and I know you've been faithful, and I know you've tried. But I also know what I know, and I've known it long enough that I'm tired of knowing it quietly. She paused. I'm not going to marry you on Saturday. I should have told you that 3 weeks ago when I first understood it clearly. I'm sorry I waited. The light in the mill building was going warmer, now the late afternoon sun moving lower, and the columns of light on the floor were turning to a deeper gold. And Eli was very quiet beside Sloane, in the way of someone receiving a thing they already knew was coming, but that still takes a moment to fully land. "Margot," he said. "I know," she said. "I know. She looked at him with the specific tenderness of someone who genuinely loves the person they are letting go. "You don't have to say anything that makes this easier. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to not know what you feel. That's all of that is yours." He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the floor. He looked at the white flowers. He looked at the phone on the empty chair. "You sent her the message," he said. It wasn't angry. It was the sound of something being confirmed, being real. "Yes. From my phone. Yes." He looked up. "Why?" Margot held his gaze with complete steadiness. "Because I couldn't make myself walk away without knowing someone else was going to be here. And because I couldn't keep pretending I didn't know what I knew. And because—" She paused. "Because you deserve to finish a conversation you've been not finishing for 7 years. And because I was never going to be the person you finished it with, and I've known that longer than either of you has, and carrying that alone got very heavy." She looked at the phone. "I'm sorry I used yours. I'm sorry for the subterfuge. I thought it was the only door I could open from the inside." Eli looked at the phone. He looked at Margot. He looked at Sloane. He ran one hand along the back of his neck, which she remembered as something he did when he was working through something large that didn't have a clean solution. "This is," he said, "a lot." "I know," Margot said. "Take the time you need." She stood. She picked up her handbag. She left the phone on the chair, left it there, deliberately. Sloane could see, not forgotten, placed. "I'm staying at my friend Claire's tonight. I'll get my things from the house tomorrow. We can talk about everything else, all the logistics, when you're ready. There's no rush." She started to walk past them toward the door. Then she stopped and turned back, and she looked at Sloane specifically, and she said, "Tell him what you actually wanted to say that night. I'll be at the venue at 4. She paused. "Well, I was. And now I'm leaving." Almost a smile. "Take care of each other." She walked to the door. She went through it. The heavy mill door closed behind her with a solid, certain sound. The venue was very quiet. Sophie had disappeared somewhere useful. The light continued to deepen along the floor. The phone sat on the empty chair between them. Sloane sat with the fact that Margot had said, "I'll be at the venue at 4." And she now understood that the message had been set up in the morning, that the entire architecture of this week. The phone call, the dinner, the house visit, the cafe this morning, all of it had been Margot running a very specific, very deliberate sequence, and that the sequence had delivered them here, on this bench, in this light, with everything in the open. She thought I could be angry at being managed. She looked at the phone on the chair. She thought about the text at 11:47 on Tuesday, and about what it had cost Margot to send it about the woman in the cafe this morning, with both hands around her coffee cup, saying, "I am tired," in the straightforward tone of someone who had made their decision and was at peace with it. She was not angry. She was not sure what she was. It was too large and too recent, and the light was too gold. And Eli was sitting beside her, and the whole week had been building toward this bench, and now she was on it, and the building had stopped. "Hey," Eli said. "Hey," she said. He turned toward her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her from across the restaurant last night, and from the kitchen doorway, and from every photo and every text, and every long silence of the past 7 years, that look that was not one thing, but several things happening at once, and she had spent 7 years refusing to name what they were. "I need to tell you something," he said, and the echo of his own text message was in his voice. He heard it too. She could see that, the slight ironic turn of it. "And I'm going to say it without the 4-second delay this time." "Okay," she said. He turned toward her on the bench, and the gold light was between them, and the phone was on the chair, and the white flowers were on the tables, and the whole mill building was very quiet around them. "I've been in love with you since that night at Devon's party," he said. "I've been in love with you for 7 years, and I made the best life I could inside of not saying it, and I don't want to do that anymore." Sloane looked at him. She thought about the composition notebook and the lines she'd underlined, and all the years she'd spent being very careful, being very generous, being the person who stepped back and made room, and told herself it was virtue when it was terror. She thought about the photograph in the silver frame. She thought about her own voice in the kitchen saying, "I panicked, and that's on me." She said, "I've been in love with you since junior year. I introduced you to her because I was scared you'd say no, and I didn't want to find out. I have been an absolute coward about this for 7 years, and I am very tired of being a coward." She said it looking straight at him, which was the hardest part. Not the words, but the looking straight at him while she said them, holding the contact without flinching, which was the thing she had never let herself do. Eli looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Okay." "Okay," she said. "I mean, I have approximately 1,000 more things to say," he said. "But I started with okay because I needed a second." He ran his hand along the back of his neck again. 7 years, he said. "We did 7 years of this." "We did," she said. "That's an extraordinary amount of time to misunderstand one conversation." "We were 22, she said. "We were idiots." "We were," he agreed, and the careful quality of the last several days was falling away from his face, replaced by something much more familiar. The Eli she'd texted at midnight and hiked badly with in her imagination, and thought about more consistently than she would ever have admitted out loud to anyone, including Devon. "I thought I genuinely believed you were telling me by walking over there that you wanted me to be with her. I thought it was the most generous, self-sacrificing thing I'd ever seen anyone do, and I thought it meant you didn't want me." "I did the most generous, self-sacrificing thing I've ever done," she said, "because I didn't want you to find out I wanted you and say no. Those are the same action and the opposite intention." "That is," he said slowly, "the most specifically you thing I have ever heard." The cowardice was extremely on brand, she agreed. He looked at her, and this time there was nothing careful in it at all. Just him looking at her in the gold light of the mill building, with 7 years of unfinished conversation between them, and the door Margot had opened from the inside. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Ask," she said. "What happens now?" he said. "Not abstractly. I know that the obvious things happen. Margot and I will figure out the practical side. There will be conversations with her family. There will be things to untangle. I know all that. I mean," he looked at her steadily, "what do you want to happen with us? What do you actually want?" She looked at him. She thought about the line in the composition notebook. What do you need to say back? And all the ways she had not answered it, all the years she had been carrying the answer around, like something too fragile to put down and examine. She was 39 hours away from when the wedding would have been. There was a phone on an empty chair and flowers on tables, and a man sitting beside her who had kept a photograph for 7 years and was asking her the most direct possible version of the question she had refused to answer for as long as she could remember. "I want," she said carefully, "to not do the version where we handle this very reasonably and take all the appropriate time and maintain healthy distance while we each process our feelings and then discover in 18 months that we've talked ourselves out of it." She looked at him. "I've been appropriate and reasonable about this for 7 years, and it has not served either of us well." "No," he said. "It really hasn't." "So," she said, "I want to figure out what this is. Not carefully, not slowly in a way that gives us time to retreat. Actually." She paused. "I live in Chicago. You live in Boston. I'm aware that is a logistical complication." "It is a logistical complication," he said seriously. "I'm flagging it," she said. "Not as a reason, as a thing that exists and can be dealt with." Things that exist and can be dealt with, he said. Yeah. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the phone on the empty chair, and then he looked at her. She did a complicated thing, he said. Margot, I'm going to need time to understand it fully. But I also think, he paused, I think she was trying to give both of us something. And I think she paid for it in her way. She did, Sloane said. She paid for it for 3 years. He nodded. They sat with that for a moment, the specific weight of being handed something at the cost of someone else's willingness to let it go. It was not a simple weight. It was not the kind of thing you processed in one afternoon. There are still things to handle, she said. Today and tomorrow and after that. A lot of things, he agreed. None of which we have to solve right now. No, he said, not right now. The gold light had shifted to copper, the sun nearly to the horizon. Outside Providence was moving into evening, and in the mill building it was very quiet, and the phone on the empty chair had been there this entire time, witness and catalyst, and the thing that had started all of it on a Tuesday morning when someone had picked it up and made a choice. Come on, Eli said. He stood. He held his hand out. Let's get out of here. She looked at his hand. She thought about 4 seconds in a doorway 7 years ago, and all the things she'd done to fill the space that fear had opened up. She took his hand. She stood up. They left the phone on the chair and the flowers on the tables, and the gold light on the floor, and they walked out of the mill building into the Providence evening, and the door closed behind them, and neither of them said anything for a full block, just walked. And that was the right way to do it, to let the silence hold what had just happened before they tried to put words around it. The harbor was visible at the end of the street. The lights were coming on. They walked to the harbor and sat on a bench at the water's edge, and the city did what cities do in the early evening. It shifted registers, the daytime version of itself giving way to the one with softer edges. The lights coming on in restaurants, and the sound of the water against the pilings, steady and unhurried. Sloane had her coat buttoned and her hands in her pockets. Eli had his hands between his knees. They were not touching, but the space between them on the bench was small enough that it felt different from any other space aware of itself, somehow. I need to call her family, he said after a while. Her parents. They flew in from Seattle. Her mother is... He stopped. Her mother planned a lot of this. She put a lot of herself into it. I know, Sloane said. Margot told me a little about her family. She deserves the call to come from me, he said, not from Margot having to explain it alone. It's going to be a difficult call. It is, she said. Are you going to be here? He said, not demanding, not assuming, asking in the specific, careful way of someone who has learned the cost of assuming. She looked at the harbor. The tugboat she'd watched from her hotel window that morning was gone now, replaced by a tourist dinner cruise making its slow turn back toward the dock. I don't have to be anywhere until Monday, she said. My editor moved my deadline. He looked at her. You planned for this to take more than a day. I planned, she said, for it to take whatever it needed to take. And then I made the reservation anyway, because that felt honest. He nodded. He looked at the water. A minute passed, and then another. I'm angry at her, he said quietly. And I'm also not angry at her. Both things are true. She should have told me 3 weeks ago when she figured it out. She should have said something instead of arranging this whole production. I needed to be part of that decision, not the person the decision gets delivered to. He paused. But I also understand why she didn't. Because if she'd said 3 weeks ago, I don't want to marry you, and then left, I would have. I would have done exactly what she said. Built the wall, disappeared into work, convinced myself it was fine. And instead, Sloane said. And instead, he said, she gave me a reason to not disappear. He was quiet for a moment. I don't know if that makes it okay, but I understand it. She loves you, Sloane said. In the specific way you love someone when you've decided to love them, and you've done the work, and you've built something real, even knowing it's not the first choice kind. That's not nothing. No, he said. It's not nothing at all. He looked at the water. She deserved better than the version of me I could give her. I don't know if that's my fault. I think it's just a truth. Some truths aren't anyone's fault. They sat with that for a while. The water did what water does. I have to ask you something, Sloane said eventually. Ask. He said the same word she'd said to him in the mill building, the same willingness in it. The photograph, she said. The one in the silver frame. You said you take it with you when you travel. You said you put it out this week because you were tired of pretending you weren't looking at it. She looked at him. Eli, what exactly were you going to do if Margot had never sent that text? If I'd never come? He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that was honest, not evasive. I don't know, he said. I'd like to tell you I was building up to something, that I had a plan. But the truth is, I think I'd gotten very good at living inside of not finishing the sentence. And I would have married Margot and been as good at the marriage as I could be. And I would have kept the photograph because I needed something real. And I would have texted you every 4 months and made jokes about hiking. And I don't know how long I could have done that. He paused. A long time, probably. People are capable of a very long time when they've decided there's no other option. She thought about that, about two people on opposite ends of the same misunderstanding, both choosing the long time because neither of them had been willing to risk the conversation that would have ended it. We were both cowards, she said. Profound cowards, he agreed. 7-year long-distance text message joke-sending cowards. The hiking texts, she said. The hiking texts, he said, and the humor in his voice was warm and rueful, and very specifically the voice of a person who had been making jokes about one thing when he meant another for years. She almost laughed. She felt it rise in her, not the panicked kind, not the nervous filler kind she used to fill silence, but the real kind. The kind that arrives when something is both terrible and human, and you are finally in a position to see it clearly. We wasted an enormous amount of time, she said. We did, he said. I'm not saying it to assign blame, she said. I'm just stating it, because I think it should be said out loud. We wasted 7 years of intermittent text message jokes and 4-second delayed decisions and printed photographs living in silver frames, and none of it was necessary. None of it was necessary, he agreed. Okay, she said. Good. I want that to be on record. Noted, he said. And then, after a pause, for the record, what did you actually feel in those 4 seconds? She looked at the harbor. She thought about a navy jacket in a doorway, and the particular quality of that clarity. Not warmth, exactly. Not excitement. Something more foundational than either of those. The feeling of recognizing something that had already been true and was now simply visible. Like something that had been crooked for a while had gone straight, she said. That's the closest I can get to it. Like something in my entire field of vision rearranged itself. She paused. And then I panicked and built a bridge so I had something to do with my hands. Eli made a sound that was nearly a laugh. You've been running away from your feelings by being useful to everyone around you literally your entire adult life, he said. I'm only now fully connecting those dots. It's a very sophisticated coping mechanism, she said. I've refined it over many years. You moved to Chicago, he said. From New York, 3 years ago. I thought Chicago would be different, she said. Less, I don't know. I thought if I changed the city, I'd change something else. Did it work? Absolutely not, she said. But the apartment is great, and I have a very good dry cleaner, so it wasn't a total loss. He laughed, the real one, not the careful version, and she heard in it the exact quality of the laugh she'd been listening for in texts for 7 years, the one you couldn't replicate in a message, the one that was just his. She turned and looked at him. He turned and looked at her. They were close enough now that she could see the lines around his eyes she'd noticed last night at the restaurant. Not aging exactly, just time, the accumulation of it. The specific way a face changes when it's been through weather. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he said. "We have to go back," she said. "You have to make the call. And I have to figure out where I'm sleeping tonight because I think your rental is about to get more complicated." He nodded slowly. "There's a question I need to ask Margot," he said, "about the next few days, about the logistics, whether she needs me to do anything, or whether she wants space, or whether—" He paused. "There are people flying in for a wedding that isn't happening. That's a lot of calls to make." "You should call Margot first," Sloane said. "Before her parents, before anyone else." "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I know." He picked up his own phone, from his jacket pocket, and looked at it. And she thought about the same phone sitting on the chair in the mill building, and about Tuesday morning at 11:47, and all of it. He didn't dial yet. He looked at her. "Will you come with me? Not into the call, just be in the vicinity, while I make it." She thought about Margot in the cafe this morning, sitting across the table with her hands wrapped around her coffee. I needed someone else to open the door. She thought about what it meant to be the person in the vicinity when something fell apart, and what it meant to have actually chosen to be that person, rather than stepping back and calling it grace. "Yes," she said. They got up from the bench. They walked back toward the neighborhood where the rental house was, and the harbor lights were behind them now, and Providence was settling into its Friday evening. And somewhere in the city, Margot was at her friend Claire's, with whatever version of relief and grief that looked like. And somewhere in Seattle, two parents who had flown across the country for a wedding that would not happen were still, for the moment, unknowing. And all of it was real and complicated, and going to require a lot of conversations, and none of it resolved cleanly, because clean resolution was not what actual life offered. What life offered was this: two people walking through a city on a Friday evening, close enough that their shoulders touched every few steps on the narrower sidewalks, not saying much, not needing to. Eli made 4 calls that evening. The first was to Margot, 23 minutes, during which Sloane sat on the porch of the rental house and listened to the night sounds of the neighborhood, and did not listen to the call. When he came out, his face had the specific quality of someone who has said difficult things and received difficult things, and found at the end of it that the air is slightly cleaner than before. "She's okay," he said. She's sad, and she's relieved," which, she said, is the strangest combination of things she's ever felt at the same time. He sat down beside her on the porch step. "She told me to say she hopes you stay for a few days. She said, and I quote," he paused, a little wry, a little raw. She said, "Tell Sloane not to run back to Chicago the second things get real." Sloane looked at the quiet street. A couple walked by with 2 dogs. "That's very specific and extremely accurate," she said. "I thought so too." The second call was to Margot's parents. That one was 31 minutes, and she heard the register of it from the porch, not the words, just the rise and fall, the place where his voice went careful and then firm, and then quiet. When he came back out, his eyes were tired. "Her mother," he said, "is—" "I know," Sloane said. "She asked if there was someone else," he said. I said no. That wasn't a lie. There isn't someone else. There's a thing I didn't deal with, which is different. That's a real distinction, she said. I needed it to be, he said. The third call was to Devon, who was apparently the logistical hub for the friend group attending the wedding, and who reacted in the way Devon always reacted to complicated news, which was with immediate practical energy, followed by a string of questions that required answers even when you didn't have them yet. Eli handled Devon with the patience of someone who had known Devon for 10 years, and had learned that the practical energy was Devon's version of care. And when he hung up, he said, Devon wants to know if you're staying, and I said I hoped so, and Devon said, obviously she should stay, she's already there. Tell her I'll call her tomorrow. Devon is a reliable force of nature, Sloane said. Devon is a reliable force of nature, he agreed. The fourth call he made alone, inside, with the door closed. She didn't know who it was, didn't ask. When he came back out later, he didn't volunteer the information, and she didn't push. Everyone was allowed at least one call that was theirs. It was past 9 by then, and the porch was properly cold. And Sloane had pulled her coat tight and was thinking about the practicalities the hotel her bag. Whether she could move her checkout to Sunday, whether she actually wanted to move it to Sunday, what it meant that she did. When Eli said, "There's a guest room here, if the hotel is annoying to deal with," Margot took her things when she went to Claire's. Sloane looked at him. "Is that a good idea?" "Probably not," he said. "But the alternative is you being 6 blocks away, and I've been 6 blocks to 1,800 miles from you for 7 years. And I'd rather have a slightly awkward house guest situation than add more distance to the pile." She thought about it. "Okay," she said, "but I'm going back to the hotel to get my bag." "I'll walk with you," he said. So they walked 6 blocks each way through the quiet Providence streets, and she got her bag and checked out, and the night receptionist gave her a look that was professionally non-judgmental. And they walked back, and the streets were even quieter now. And he carried her bag when she handed it to him without being asked and without making anything of it, and she noticed. Inside the rental house, standing in the kitchen with its blue tile backsplash, he made tea, because neither of them wanted wine, and both of them needed something to do with their hands. She sat on the counter the way she'd sat on counters in kitchens since college, and watched him move around the space that had been, until today, the kitchen of his almost marriage. And there was something specific and strange and necessary about being in that room on that night. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can always ask me something," he said without turning around. "What was the something?" she said. "The thing you said you needed to tell me, in the text. When it was still, when I thought it was from you. What would the something have been if you'd sent it yourself?" He filled the kettle. He set it on the stove. He turned around and leaned against the counter across from her and looked at her for a moment before he spoke. "That I'd been holding on to a wrong interpretation for 7 years, he said. But I'd been carrying it around and building my life around the shape of it, and that I was about to make it permanent. And I needed you to know that even if nothing changed, I wasn't okay with you not knowing. That I'd loved you from the night of the party, and I'd made peace with it, and unmade peace with it, and made peace with it again so many times that I'd lost count, and that the hiking texts were not actually about hiking." She looked at him across the kitchen. "That would have been a longer text," she said. "That's why I hadn't sent it yet," he said. The kettle began to make its preliminary sound. The kitchen was warm. Outside Providence was deep in its Friday night, and somewhere across the city, Margot was at Claire's, and the wedding that was supposed to happen in 16 hours was not going to happen. And all of that was real and would need to be dealt with. And also, right now there was a kitchen with a blue backsplash and 2 cups of tea about to be made, and a distance of about 8 feet between them that was entirely crossable. "Eli," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I need you to do something." "Okay." "I need you to cross the kitchen," she said. "And I need you to not give me any reason to step back before you do. Because if you give me an opening, I will step back. I know this about myself. It's a design flaw, and I'm working on it, but in the meantime, you have to not create the opening." He was quiet for exactly 1 beat. Then he pushed off the counter and crossed the kitchen and stopped about a foot from her, close enough that she had to tilt her chin slightly to look at him. And he was looking at her with the complete absence of the careful quality he'd been carrying since she arrived. Just him. Just the version of him that existed before he'd taught himself to protect it. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. "I'm not going to give you an opening," he said. "Good," she said. He put his hands on either side of her where she was sitting on the counter, and she put her hands on his arms, and they stayed like that for a moment in the warm kitchen with the kettle starting to whistle. And then she said, "The kettle." "The kettle can wait," he said. And she laughed, the real kind, the kind she hadn't expected. And he was smiling, the smile she recognized from the hiking photo and from 4 seconds in a doorway 7 years ago. And then he kissed her. The kettle complained briefly and then gave up, and the kitchen was warm, and it was Friday night in Providence. And 7 years is a very long time. But it ends eventually. 3 days later, Sloane was in the passenger seat of Eli's car on the way to the Providence Amtrak station. He was driving her to the train, and she had a Monday deadline she had already extended once and could not extend again. And there was a specific quality to this particular car ride. The kind of quality that exists when something has happened and the logistics of ordinary life are reasserting themselves, and you are very aware of what you're returning to and what you're leaving. "I have a conference call at 2, she said, "and a staff meeting at 4, and a piece I need to read tonight." "I have a site visit tomorrow," he said, "and a call with a client in London at 7 a.m., which I scheduled in a moment of extreme optimism about my own morning functionality." "We're both going back to our actual lives," she said. "We are," he said, "which are in different cities." "Which are in different cities," she agreed. She looked out the window. Providence was doing what it had done all week, existing, unhurried, indifferent to human drama. The brick and the water and the steeples all exactly the same as they'd been before she arrived. She found this comforting rather than diminishing. The city had seen a great deal and had opinions about none of it. "I've been thinking," Eli said in the careful voice of someone who has actually been thinking, "about what it would take to close the distance." She turned to look at him. "In terms of what?" "In terms of geography," he said. "I'm in Boston. You're in Chicago. That's not a small gap. I know we have time, and I know we just found our footing here, and I'm not—" He glanced at her. "I'm not proposing logistics the second you get in the car. I'm saying I've been thinking about it, and I want you to know that I'm thinking about it. Because the last time I didn't say what I was thinking, we lost 7 years to a misunderstanding about a party introduction, and I would like to not repeat that." She looked at him. She thought about the composition notebook on the train from Chicago. What does he need to tell you? What do you need to say back? And she thought about the photograph in the silver frame and the text at 11:47, and Margot sitting across from her in the cafe with her hands around her coffee cup. "I'm also thinking about it," she said. "I want you to know that." He nodded. He kept his eyes on the road, but she could see the quality of his exhale, the specific release of someone who has said a thing they needed to say and had it received. "Okay," he said. "Good." "Okay," she said. "Good." They rode in comfortable silence for a little while. She thought about the last 3 days, the long walk after the mill building, the calls on the porch, the kitchen, on Friday night, Saturday morning with coffee and no particular agenda, wandering along the water and talking about things that were not the main thing, and then talking about the main thing, and then talking about things that were not the main thing again, which was, she thought, the correct way to talk about the main thing. She thought about Sunday afternoon when they'd driven out to the bay and sat on the rocks, and she'd told him about her mother. Not the clean version, but the one underneath it. The one where her mother's lifelong willingness to sacrifice herself for everyone around her had taught Sloane at a very young age that love was something you expressed by making yourself smaller, and that she'd spent 29 years unlearning it with mixed success. He'd listened without fixing it. He'd said after a while, "I think you've been a lot braver than you give yourself credit for. I think walking toward things scared counts as brave." She'd said that was very generous. He'd said it was accurate. They'd argued about it in the specific, warm way of two people who are finding out what it feels like to disagree about something that matters and discover it's not catastrophic. She thought about the text she'd gotten from Margot on Sunday afternoon, which she had read and reread several times. "Take care of each other. I'm okay." 12 words. She had looked at them for a long time before replying, and then she'd written, "Thank you." for all of it, which was inadequate and the only true thing she had. At the station, Eli pulled up to the curb and put the car in park and turned to look at her. "Chicago," he said. "Chicago," she confirmed. "I'm going to come see you in 3 weeks," he said. "Not a question. I'm already looking at flights. I wanted to say it out loud so it's a real thing that exists in the world." She looked at him. She thought about the version of herself who had sat on a train 2 Thursdays ago and written in a composition notebook and booked an Amtrak ticket because she was done being careful, and she thought, "That version of you made it here. Don't retreat now." 3 weeks, she said. "I'll make a reservation somewhere good. Somewhere with 2 chairs, he said, so we can have a conversation without one of us sitting on a counter." "Bold of you to assume I'll relinquish the counter," she said. He laughed. She got out of the car. He got out of the car and came around, and they stood on the sidewalk outside the station, with people moving past them in both directions. The controlled chaos of a transit hub. And he was looking at her the way he had looked at her from the beginning of this week, and the beginning of 7 years before this week. And she was looking back at him, without flinching, without stepping back, without building a bridge to have something to do with her hands. "I should go," she said. "Yeah," he said. Neither of them moved for a moment. "Eli," she said. "Yeah." "Thank you," she said, "for keeping the photograph." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, "Thank you for coming." She went. She went through the station doors and found her track and stood on the platform while the train loaded, and she did not look back, not because she was afraid to, but because she didn't need to. She had made the reservation. She had said the thing she'd carried for 7 years. She was on the correct train, going in the right direction, and 3 weeks was not a long time. She sat down at a window seat. She pulled out the composition notebook and opened it to the page she'd started on the train from Chicago. What does he need to tell you? What do you need to say back? She looked at both lines. Then she turned past all 7 pages of careful, anxious handwriting to a fresh page at the back. She wrote 1 line. "You said it. He stayed." She looked at it. She put the pen down. She watched Providence disappear through the window as the train pulled out the brick and the steeples and the water, all of it receding at the pace of a city that has no particular investment in being departed from. The train moved. The page stayed blank beneath her single line, and that was fine. It had everything it needed. The rest was what came next. She put the notebook away. She opened her laptop. She had a piece due Monday, and it was Sunday afternoon, and she had approximately 9 hours to be a person who edited other people's stories for a living, which she was, which she would go on being, regardless of what else she was now. She began to read. 3 weeks. She was already counting. On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks and 4 days after Sloane Avery had boarded a train to Providence, she was at her desk in the Chicago office when her phone lit up with a text from a number she now recognized immediately, the way you recognize a particular quality of light. "Just landed. The cab driver has strong opinions about deep dish pizza, and I think he might be right." She read it and smiled, and the open floor plan office continued around her keyboards and distant laughter, and the coffee machine, indifferent and ordinary. "Second floor," she typed back. "There's a key under the mat, but you have to count the tiles or you'll pick the wrong mat. I'll be home by 7. "Second floor," he replied. 7. "Got it." And then, after a pause of exactly 43 seconds, "I'm really glad I came, Sloane." She looked at the message for a moment. She thought about the 11:47 text from 3 weeks ago, and the silver frame, and February, and Devon's basement, and the photograph, and all of it. All of it. The whole 7 years of it, sitting quietly behind this one ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She typed back, "I'm really glad you're here." She put her phone in her pocket. She picked up her red pen. She had a manuscript to get through before 7, and 7 was not far, and the work was there to be done, and she was, in all the ways that counted, exactly where she needed to be. Outside Chicago was doing what Chicago did, big and gray-skied and perpetually in motion, the lake at the end of the grid, everything continuing. The afternoon light came through the office windows at a low angle, the same gold that had come through the mill building in Providence 3 weeks ago, and she noticed it and let it be what it was, just light, just afternoon, just the particular color of things that have been going somewhere for a while and have finally arrived.